we will get started.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
Alicia.
Yeah, let me get started with some
Yeah,
housekeeping items, Josh, and
yeah,
then I'll
of
hand
course.
it over
Sorry.
to you. No worries. Again, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's event, Unlocking Innovation, Defining Composable to Leverage Digital Success. Today, Pantheon and Favorite will bring this concept down to earth and discuss how leading organizations are leveraging open source with a composable approach to get ahead of the competition. I'm Alicia Feliciano, and I will be your host and moderator for today's event. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. In this webinar, the panelists will be the only ones with their camera on, but we encourage you to engage as attendees. If you have any comments, please feel free to use the chat, but for any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will answer your questions during the Q&A portion at the end of today's presentation. We also have live captioning available. Just make sure to enable it on the bottom of your screen. This event is also being recorded and will be made available to everyone next week. All right, without further anticipation, I'd like to now hand it over to Josh.
All right. Thank you for, as always, a incredibly professional introduction. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. My name's Josh. I'm co-founder of Pantheon and our chief strategy officer, and I'm pleased to be here today with Karim Marucchi, CEO of Crowd Favorite. Karim, good to be with you.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to get into the questions, and I'm excited to see from that poll, really wanting people to unpack some of these buzzwords and get down to earth about what this stuff means. But before we do, for those who are not familiar with you or me, a quick introduction. So, Pantheon's a website operations platform. We help tens of thousands of professional web teams build, launch, manage, optimize, maintain, and iterate on hundreds of thousands of actual individual websites. We reach over 1 billion unique monthly visitors, and we like to put the magic of the internet in everyone's hands. Karim, do you want to introduce yourself and Crowd Favorite?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Karim Marucchi, CEO of Crowd Favorite. We are a specialty firm that we do digital strategy and execution and development around solving business problems with technology. Our love is how to do that with open source tools. We are some of the original engineers that brought you part of the WordPress platform. Our founder, Alex King, was one of the first people to work on the project for WordPress. And since then, we've been scaling and solving difficult problems with open source tools like WordPress ever since. Our team is international, and we work mostly with Fortune 500 customers. And we're looking forward to seeing where what has been the DXP category, the CMS category for years is becoming DXP, and where all these new interesting marketing tools and CMS tools are going in the coming years.
Awesome. Well, that's a great segue to the first thing that we want to talk about. Before we get into Composable, I just wanted to take on the topic of DXP, and this has, been a dominant acronym in our professional ecosystem for the past feels like decade, but it's actually a little less. The concept of the DXP arose from a hypothesis from the industry analysts that was not a bad one, that we would see a similar pattern in the world of digital experiences, which is kind of a fuzzy term, but encompasses the web for sure. We would see similar patterns there that we saw in industries like CRM and ERP, where a vendor would come out as a leader and they would just sort of roll up the whole space, and there'd be two or three, and they would kind of be the ones. And that was not a silly thing to predict happening, but what actually happened in the intervening time was we had the Martech 10,000 just explode, and I think now there's real tension in the industry between the kind of monolithic view that goes historically with this idea of a DXP being an all-encompassing vendor, and the reality that everyone is to some extent assembling a stack from a number of different components. Let me ask you, Kareem, though, where have you seen this tension arise, and why do you think that DXP prediction didn't quite come to pass?
Well, It sort of history repeats itself, unfortunately. And what's happened in the CMS market for the last 20 years is already, with accelerated timelines because of accelerated technology, is already starting to happen to DXP. There's some major flaws that are coming out, and the major flaws have to do with the fact that it is a black box. You get stuck onto the roadmap that you're given by the technology bringing it together. Once it's monolithic, it's monolithic. They have to create the same advancement for all their customers all the time, and you are stuck on that pathway. You have the concept of not being able to get data in and out easily and be able to pick and choose what you want to do, no matter what their marketing says. The bottom line is that only a small percentage of what they say is modular is actually composable. Then you have projects that are saying, look, we're using open source, we're compatible with open source. But again, the idea of trying to keep everything within one monolithic system is a problem. And then finally, you have, the players that aren't the number one, two, or three, that if you're on that platform and it isn't right for you, you have this giant migration cost of trying to get across to some other platform.
Yeah, I think that, the sort of suite approach it's always it's just problematic again because it runs against what the market is demonstrating people really want. And this is so many stories of people constantly selling the roadmap and, oh, the innovation you want is coming next year, it's coming next year, it's in the next version, it's in the next version. Oh, but by the way, I've got this other tool that I also want to sell you that's adjacent. And it's just not a great experience for people that want to drive results. And I wanted to dig into actually sort of more from a technology standpoint, what are these DXPs really? And the reality is that they're mashups, right? These are all, platforms that were built through a series of acquisitions, right? They present themselves as, it's sold as a monolith, one big thing, but it's not actually very turnkey. And ironically, even though there's a P in the acronym, they're not really platforms. They don't have an underlying substrate on which all the integration happens. It's a bit, all over the place. And most of them don't actually take responsibility for delivering the digital experiences either. So there are missing pieces both at the top and the bottom of the stack. But I think, Kareem, correct me if I'm wrong, you're out there talking to real customers and clients. There
Mhm.
is a perception in the market that if you need this type of stuff, you you can't really do it yourself. You need to composing your own stack is even slower, even more costly, and even more risky. I mean, obviously, we're here to challenge the assumption, like the slide says, but do you see that fear in the market, and how do you respond to it?
Well, so it is something that comes up quite literally daily. Uh, if you've ever been in a growing business or you're in an enterprise, the idea of actually, we have a business problem, let's build something that ends up being bespoke, or let's build something out of different parts, it becomes very problematic. So the marketing approach for the monolithics was, here, let's actually create an entire platform that solves all your problems magically. What ended up happening very quickly that we've seen literally in the last 12 to 18 months is they've customers have realized they didn't like piece X or Y. As you said, it was an acquisition and it didn't really, gel well. It didn't migrate well into the rest of the platform. So they said, okay, I'd like to take my functionality X outside of your platform. So now these monolithics have put up banners saying, we are composable, we are composable. But they're really not, because it's such a small degree of information that you can get in and out, or that's actually compatible with the Martech 10,000 or doing other things, that you end up spending so much money if you truly want to um, customize these experiences, that it's just not worth its weight. And that's what
Yeah,
customers are telling us.
yeah. So you're saying that if you take an approach, and this is what we're going to get into with like what composability means, taking an approach that says, I want to have more authorship over the experience from the get-go. I don't want to outsource everything to one vendor. You're actually going to save money in the long run.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's get into it. So, understanding composable. I think you've got a nice little definition here. Why don't you walk us through this?
Yeah. So what ends up happening here is, if you look at what a true DXP is today, honestly, they started with the CMS. We all understand the concept of getting information out onto the web. And then, over the last couple of decades, we've all talked about this customer 360 experience. It's all about getting to your customer and retaining that relationship with your customer. So you had more and more marketing tools added. You had to bring in enterprise services, whether it's your CRM or customer service, sometimes even pieces of your ERP, or even sometimes some of the e-commerce ideas that you want it more integrated. So the digital experience is really meant to say, I'm not just publishing things onto the web. It's actually something that is more of an idea of, I want to have every single aspect of my conversation with my customer have a through line. So now that we're moving towards, let's talk about composable, these assumptions about how if you build it, it's going to be complex, or jumping between 18 user interfaces. We're constantly having customers coming to us saying, to get any one workflow done, I have to jump between 6 to 8 tabs on a browser because we're using some of the best Martech 10,000 tools on top of also being on a monolithic. And they're not playing well together, no matter what their marketing says. Uh, and then lastly, obviously, what it doesn't mean is that you have to have a giant team to manage something that's composable. It really is something that you can create and then hand over to a content or an editorial marketing team.
Yeah, I
Right?
think what you mentioned about like people are the reality is people are, and I like that you made it the 11,000. People are pulling out from these Martech ecosystems and then putting it on top of monolithic DXPs. I saw that in a number of presentations at the most recent Stacky Awards from the Martech conference, and it's like, okay, great, you went all in for the expensive, all-encompassing DXP, and then you've got the jankiest integration because it's all just like tags on tags on tags at that point, to plug in a bunch of other tools that you didn't get from the one vendor that had one ring to rule them all. It's kind of the worst of both worlds.
Exactly. So, I mean, really, what does composable mean? Let's define what actually you should, as a business, not as a technologist, as a business, what you should expect as out of composable. You want to be able to literally swap components. You want it to be truly modular without having to go into refactoring or figuring out a new business process. You want to be able to respond to changes in the market. We've all seen the hype cycle of technologies, and people want to move fast on certain things. And then we go, wait a minute, maybe we don't. Let's back it up. And then there's obviously composable means trying to control those costs. If I wanted to change my mind all the time on what I wanted to do for the marketing of the business, those costs could spiral out of control. For anybody who's speaking to you in your business about composable, make sure you're talking about that total cost of ownership.
Yeah, that's
That's,
such an important point. Okay, so then not, I guess we're gonna like, rub it in a little bit, but like let's talk about this promise that the monolithic DXPs have. I think this is, you're showing us kind of like an Adobe ecosystem slide here, right?
yes. So this is a slide that promises you that you have a monolithic system that can be viewed as composable, yet you can get your entire marketing done at this giant telecom company. No matter what arm you're in, no matter what business unit you're in, you can actually get this done. But it looks beautiful as this promise.
Yeah, it
But
sounds
here's the
great.
reality. Yeah, here's the reality. 37 separate administrative interfaces, 22 different workflows. I don't know about you, Josh, but I don't want to retrain my entire marketing team to actually have to deal with this.
I mean, it's just not possible at a certain point. Like, I mean, I've seen this actually. We had a we had this conversation within Pantheon, not thinking about the Martech or the web stack, because we're walking our talk there. But we looked at like the number of tools we have internally around training and onboarding, and there's like four different things that it's just four, and that became impossible to govern and manage, and things were happening inconsistently, and people didn't know what to do. I can't imagine how you're trying to function with 37 different UIs.
So even if you're in one business unit that only touches 6 of these things. Imagine having to deal with those 6 things. And then if you're talking to another department, they don't even know how to address what you need to do. I mean, it just became more and more difficult as part of the editorial workflow of marketing teams.
Yeah. Okay, so here's you're going to present this alternative, but I mean I have to say this looks pretty monolithic to me too. Like, explain what's
Right.
going on here.
Right. So you're right. This does look, oh my God, it's the same exact thing. Aren't we looking at the same thing? Well, I'd like to point out one thing. The idea that these are modules. As you can see, some of the things can be plugged in and taken out and put back in and replaced and that kind of thing. And that still gives you that customer 360 view of things. But as we're going to break down further, you can actually build these as modular as long as you have a core. So this is where we introduce the core of using open source as a hub, right? If you're using open source as a hub and you have a stable platform, from there, you can make decisions. And then whether you're talking about the blue circle or the hexagons around it, those things are actually truly modular and interchangeable. Yet they're held together, which we're going to get into, by a unified UX user interface. And that makes one workflow.
Okay, that sounds compelling. So then let's get into a little bit, why people are moving in this direction. It seems obvious, but like let's talk about what we really mean here. You started off talking a lot about flexibility, right?
Right. So again, looking at the concept of this modularity here, right? The key here is with the cost savings that you can have over some of these monolithic systems, you can actually afford to make part of your project a customized user interface, a customized workflow, and still end up saving quite a bit of resources, time, energy, money on one of these monolithic systems because it's made for your existing workflows or your improved workflows as you switch out modules. The key here is to focus on not the technology, but by using open source as a hub and then wrapping it around with a unified UX, you can actually switch out the different modules that in a more monolithic system you're stuck with.
Yeah, and again, in those monolithic approaches, you're stuck with them, and they're also a separate browser tab. But I know you said let's not focus on the technology, but just to bring it down to earth, like real world example here, are we saying with this approach, you could, for instance, have your content team using a tool that they love, and then you could have a business decision that requires you to swap out or integrate a new DAM, digital asset management platform. Like maybe there's some new capabilities for rights management that the business needs to handle, and then the old tool wasn't cutting it, so they had to bring in something new. You could accomplish that change without having to retrain that content team.
That's exactly right. So I'll give you a real world example. Later on, we're going to be looking at it and an example that we architected for Disney, where we had to move content management, the DAM part of the content management system, and we kept the same exact workflow for the client and just swapped it right out.
Yeah, so that's where you get into a really interesting conversation of trade-offs because your productivity of that team isn't skipping a beat. You're not creating a bunch of risk of human error from introducing a new tool. And it's not just about, I mean, I'm sure there might have been cost savings on licensing or other stuff too, but it's really like, again, that is what we mean by total cost of ownership, right?
Exactly. I mean, look, the SaaS model today is one of how do I keep customers? And they're doing that through sometimes honestly just trying to give you the best product. And sometimes they're doing that through just making it hard to switch away. The idea behind this composability, this modularity, is to really put that power back into the business decision makers to be able to say, I'm not going to be held hostage by one technology.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then the other thing you talked about a lot in there that I heard coming through was agility, which is near and dear to our hearts. But why don't you explain it in your terms?
So the way I love to deal with it is a lot of our clients come to us quite literally through procurement because they were sold, or they were proposed a monolithic system, and they said, we heard open source is more cost effective. Can you tell us about that? And the number one most surprising thing is, not only can an open source system save you money, but using a fraction of that savings and still creating a pretty big savings, you can create your own actual innovation. So for instance, we were talking about the hype cycle earlier. If you wanted to experiment with one of the 4,000, it seems, daily AI tools that are coming out these days, for one particular part of your marketing, but it's under the hood and off to the side. You can actually do that in a term of, let's experiment with something in a sandbox in a matter of weeks instead of matter of quarters, right?
Yeah.
That's a big difference.
Yeah. Because we've had independent research with the Hanover Group come back and tell us that 80% of marketers are challenged to make even a minor change to their website in under a week, and most of them are talking about publishing content. But you're talking about something much more ambitious here, right?
Right. Because when you're dealing with this composable system, it's very easy to say, I can't touch production. It has to be, perfect. But I can create a sandbox, and I can try something over here, and I can test it with some customers. And again, at a fraction of the time, effort, and cost. You can't do that even if you had a system that was made up of different aspects of the Martech 10,000. You have no hub. You have no unified UX to be able to work through that workflow process, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, well, I want to add from our side, the other things that we've seen open source really move the needle on in the enterprise is actually getting to true enterprise scale. There are certain things that open source unlocks there.
Now, I'm going to interrupt you to say, I saw this slide and I was going to ask you, enterprise scalability. To me, are you talking about like how much traffic we're coming in? Because that's what everybody's expecting when you say the word scalability.
Oh, yeah. I guess my little sort of like bar chart looking graph might have also left that impression. No, I mean, yes, people struggle with that, but no, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm really talking about the needs of an enterprise organization that has complexity within it, where there are lots of stakeholders, there's lots of, different groups. It's not one big marketing team, or one centrally managed communications apparatus. And so the monolithic tools really do run into, the fact that they don't fit the org chart. And what we've helped a lot of our customers do, and we'll get into some of the specific case studies in a bit, is really unlock this idea of, freedom within a framework. So you can have a governance model where you can pick it, you can architect what you want to have be globally shared, these sort of horizontal capabilities that go across the whole organization without boxing in the teams that are aligned with usually different business units or
Ah,
groups or divisions. They need to have authority over the actual digital experience if they're going to have a chance to win, right? They can't just have their hands tied behind their back. Um, and just to get like a little bit more specific about how we see this playing out, not always, but frequently, right? You have what you're talking about, Kareem, these kind of like these key integrations and the things, you're going to swap these tools around and you have this modularity for a reason, but some of these are things that they want them to be globally shared. You want to have one CRM system for the whole organization, for instance. And so you don't do that on a project by project basis. You do that and maintain that horizontally, but then you can distribute ownership of the actual end user experience, that the type of content that you need to present and how and where that experience leads and how it connects to those other business systems, that can be
right.
managed vertically by these individual teams. And we've seen that work really successfully for a number of customers. Again, I'm going to get into some of the case studies, but this sort of approach to, you know, allowing an organization to not have a monolithic, even the composable thing itself doesn't need to be monolithic. You can have composable capabilities and almost a microservices mindset for how they get deployed within the organization.
Microservices, that's it. I mean, I'm curious to see, you've heard my spiel, but how do you explain to customers when they're saying, how can you mix open source with SaaS off-the-shelf systems. Like that's anti-open source, or don't the SaaS systems, how do you explain that to folks? Because sometimes it can feel like it's open source heresy, right?
Yeah. I mean, there definitely are people who are purists, I would say, and I respect the strength of their convictions, who would say you should never have any of your stuff in a proprietary or SaaS tool. From my standpoint, I think, open source, it's free as in freedom, which is really important. That's why some people are purists about it. It's free as in beer, which is also really important. That's one of the ways you can kind of leverage it at scale. Like that's something that actually is enabled by this model. Everybody else who's out there, they're encumbering what you can do with their software based on the licensing model. And the fact that open source tools allow you to run 1,000 different instances, if that's what your organization needs, without that being a hurdle, it's a big part of how things get done. But open source is also free as in puppies, which means you need to be mindful of when you choose, because with great power comes great responsibility, right? You can't, I don't think there are many organizations out there that really can go like all open source everything, because it's just way too much to manage. And in fact, our whole premise as Pantheon is that if you really want to get the value from these open source content management systems and user experience frameworks, DIYing it is actually probably not your best bet. You need help. You need expertise, and you need a great platform to really get the value out of open source. So our perspective is it's really a pragmatic one, right? You want to own your data, you want to own your content, you don't want to be encumbered by licensing, but you also don't want to have to like care and feed for a whole kennel full of puppies, because that's not your business, right? So
Exactly.
we're helping people like kind of thread the needle to that value proposition in new ways. And there are definitely some people who will see it as not true to the open source ecosystems to some extent. But I would also add, like, actually, if you go look at the page source for salesforce.com, you know what they're running? WordPress.
Mhm.
So and open source as a hub has always been a big part of the story. That's totally authentic. All right, so bring it on home for us before we get into case studies. Like, what do
Absolutely.
you see your customers asking for?
So I'm not going to read the entire slide to everybody, but you get the idea, because this is actually in order when you look at these bullet points. Again, people think about using open source as a hub because they're saying, okay, there's no licensing. That's compelling. But what that really ends up meaning is automatically you actually don't get locked in, which cascades down this list to the fact that if you choose an open source platform like WordPress as a hub for your CRM to then build the DXP on, you can actually innovate faster. You can have the support of a giant marketplace that is 43% of the internet and has tens of thousands of experienced developers. You have the support base of some of the best open source support companies out there. And on top of it, you own your data and your roadmap of where you're going, all at a lower total cost of ownership. So more and more, we're seeing literally procurement inviting us in before we even get to the point of being invited in by the marketers. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, and I think the people say this with a little bit of tongue in cheek, but I think I don't know of any marketing organization that isn't under pressure right now to do more with less. And how do you do more with less? Well, you have to innovate and you have to lower your costs simultaneously. And that's why this is what people are asking for. But let's get out of the abstract and into the specific. So you've got a couple case studies, and so do I. So maybe we can just talk people through some real world customers, and then we can see what questions folks have.
Absolutely. So Academic Partnerships is an interesting marketing company that actually creates marketing funnels for the big four-year universities. And if you look at the center of your screen, you see the very complex gray boxes that was their workflow. We were able to bring that down into the concept of, with 4 screens, going through questions and answers on 4 screens, you should be able to publish your microsite, your marketing site, within hours instead of weeks. What that did is that brought down the complexity of the editorial process by close to 90%. Slide, please.
Yep.
Right. There we go. So what ended up, sorry, not close to 90%, 92%. 92% reduction in the editorial team having to put out content. We are able to do 23 external system integrations, and which brought them literally 22% more business in their first year. Now, that's already impressive, but if you think about it, 30% savings, including the customization of the user interface on the back end, 30% savings in implementing, with a 35% year over year cost savings for total cost of ownership. You can't beat that. You just can't.
Yeah, that's like you're talking about literally 10xing their productivity while reducing their costs by a third
Exactly.
and increasing the top line of the business by 22%. That's,
Right. Now,
those are the kind of results people, yeah, I see
yeah,
why you
your
have this case
mileage
study
will
slide.
vary. Right? Your mileage will vary, yada yada. But the bottom line is these things are possible if planned correctly. And then the second case study I brought is literally on the opposite end of the scale. So uh, we're lucky enough at Crowd Favorite to have helped Walt Disney Company figure out where they were going with their WordPress architecture in 2010, 2011 for the entire organization. And in that architecture, as we were saying earlier, they wanted a certain amount of things, as you said, Josh, to be scalable across the entire enterprise horizontally, but then they had certain niches that they needed fixed. One of these was for Disney ABC Press. Disney ABC Press is for all 14 brands of the Disney outward facing press relations, including Lucasfilms and all those wonderful properties. What ended up happening here is we built the site for them in this fashion. Everybody thinks that this concept is new of Composable. We built this site in 2014. Josh, ask me how many times we had to refactor or migrate this website.
I mean, that's 10 years, so I would expect at least once.
Nope,
Okay.
zero. They acquired Fox, everybody remembers that, and they went through two different reorganizations of their entire business structure in this business unit. And we were able to take out modules, pull in modules, change some of the user interface without ever refactoring completely the code. By handling upgrades and refactors and things on a modular basis, you're dramatically lowering that type of cost of constantly trying to keep up with the technology. And lastly, for the folks who think that WordPress can't handle large projects, 14 million media assets. The example of the dam that we talked about earlier, this is it. WordPress out of the box may not be able to do that, but it doesn't mean that it can't do that when architected correctly with the correct dam and the correct workflow, right?
Yeah, I mean it's like it's all about, you know, the tool and how you use it. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's definitely some impressive scale. Well, I've got a couple to talk to as well, and then we'll get to questions. One I want to mention was one of our great customers at the Princeton University Office of Information Technology, right? So yeah, EDU as a vertical, you know, they need scale and performance, and I mean that in both terms of the word, right? They have organizational complexity out the wazoo because you've got multiple different technology centers of excellence. You've got people in communications and marketing that are running their own show effectively, and you need a way to tie all that together. And the monolithic approach is just guaranteed to fail in this environment. You know, if it whether it's like IT saying everyone has to use this web thing because it'll make it secure, or like the comms person trying to cudgel everyone into using the same template factory because they want to be on brand. You just, you know, it's like it's the most difficult cat herding exercise I think you've ever seen. We work with a lot of these big campuses, and that freedom within a framework concept, it was really key for them. You know, they were able to get a lot of stuff regularized while also, not having people jump ship because they were trying to put them in too much of a box. And then, that led to better performance for the organization. Like you mentioned, academic partnerships, one of your customers, all of these institutions are essentially, some of the stuff they're doing is like publishing their research and, doing their academic mission. But a lot of the way they use the web, it's essentially a very complex B2B marketing and sales process to attract new students and also to extract money from former students in the form of alumni donations. And those are things that are increasingly done, more and more of that is happening online. And you have, especially with student recruitment, right? Like you have we're in like probably year 5 or 6 of being full digital natives being the incoming class, and they're gonna do a lot of that journey before they ever even show up, if they do, for a campus tour. It's happening on the internet, and then those people are graduating and going on to have great careers, and you're trying to facilitate a culture of development and donations from them. That's also going to be heavily mitigated online. So the idea that you can get good digital experiences that rival what people are used to from native mobile apps is key, because otherwise you just don't look credible. You're not going to be very engaging. And so, this was a really good case study for us in that microservices approach, but also with the idea of, really needing to deliver on performance from not just from a, core web vitals standpoint, but like the outcome of that is more people engaging in the recruitment process, more people engaging in becoming donors. And another example, Pernod Ricard, they are a international holding company that has, I think some of the a bunch, probably a third of the top liquor brands in the world. So they have Jameson and Remy Martin and all these other ones like this. It's actually like over 200 different luxury brands. They're operating in almost 100 different markets. And when we first were engaged with them, they were sort of suffering from the failure of a monolith, because they had tried to put all this stuff together into a thing that was like 3 years behind and over budget. And in the meantime, all these different brands and all these different markets, they're not waiting on anyone. They have campaigns they're running. They're trying to drive, awareness of their brand and engagement with, the community around what they're doing. And so they're just hiring a local agency and doing whatever. And that central IT organization back at the home office, they end up holding the bag for all of that at the end of the day, which is a very difficult position for them to be in. And so, this is not a case where they were going to be able to standardize on the brand or the look and feel, like, because these were all different brands. And in fact, they're bringing new ones in all the time, because mergers and acquisitions are a big part of all these businesses. So they have to deal with, the challenges of adapting new technologies or existing legacy technologies to something that's more coherent. And what they really developed was a great approach, and again, built around the idea of WordPress as this framework, as this hub for their business, where they could get local markets up and running much faster, and then they could do it in a way that didn't inhibit their ability to innovate, but it made it really like a sane proposition to maintain long term. Plus, they could make sure that they were doing the right things for that at that horizontal layer, at that global layer. So no matter who's spinning up what for which brand in which country, you're going to be connected back into the part of the company's global data strategy. For example, you're going to be using standards around accessibility that are going to limit their legal liability. There are these things that they're able to bake into the platform as part of the approach, so that even though there 1,000 flowers are blooming, or like a couple hundred websites are blooming,
Right.
and they come and go because campaigns come and go. In this microservices model, you're not actually just like creating chaos. Like, this has actually got structure and order and durability to it. And for them to go from, you know, 3 years into a 2-year project to build the monolith to solve all the problems, to now we can create a new environment for a new agency and a new market in under an hour and just let them run with it. It's a night and day difference. And they're just super happy with it.
Josh, if I may, I know the point of that middle point was about the two engineers, but I've had so many conversations with CMOs about those 225 marketers. The idea that across a conglomerate with different brands, this is something we worked with on Campbell's for their different brands, to be able to standardize how you're going to be approaching the different marketing teams and get things published quickly. So you're constantly training people is a huge cost savings, and it brings innovation because those marketers aren't left with spending so much time in the system. They're actually doing more time actually marketing.
Yes, 100%, right? Like, well, we're looking at it, from the standpoint of the people we're directly supporting, which is the web ops team within this company. But the marketing organizations are standing on their shoulders, and that's where the real value is being delivered. And you're so right that if you can unleash that next level up, and they're empowered, they don't need to come back to you for changes. They know they can self-serve on most, if not anything, they need to do. They're going to do better marketing, and that's going to move the needle for the business. So again, unleash innovation, drive drive top line creativity and growth, but at the same time, why not also save money? Because you can have it all in some sense. All right, let's wrap it up and see what questions folks have. We touched on all four of these points a few times, but flexibility, agility, scalability, to the needs of an organization, not just to a bunch of traffic, although I'm sure probably people have a bunch of traffic too. And that immediate and lifetime value. Maybe in the interest of time, Karim, can you just characterize again that last point, immediate value and lifetime value?
Right. So the idea here is it's easy to beat up on the monolithics, or even what they're calling themselves composable these days, to talk about licensing costs. But it goes beyond that, because the immediate value of having a customized experience for your editorial team or your content team being made upfront quite literally means that when the system launches, you don't have that lag, that hangover from training people. So you have immediate value to live. Another thing that is immediate is the fact that these can be done in phases. We have plenty of customers that say, okay, we don't want a capital expenditure project that's going to take 9 months to build. We want to see something going very quickly. How do we do that very quickly? We can break it up into phases so you can go live with a first phase and then have a second phase and a third phase that doesn't jar the system. So when we say immediate, there's so many ways to save time and money. It just depends on what your business needs are. And then over the lifetime, with literally following the model that's now 24 years old that IBM and Red Hat came up with years ago, of having unified support, what ends up happening is that you increase your value by not having to constantly churn the entire thing. You can take out modules and put in modules.
Yeah, and designing the system for that is going to be lower cost in the long run because you're not having to do that redesign. And it's an excellent point about that immediate value of being able to do something quickly. Because I think in today's market, most buyers are very wary of big long-term projects. They want to see, I've got capital to deploy, but I want to do it in an iterative fashion. I want to do a pilot project. I want to see some real benefit before we make a bigger commitment. And that's just frankly hard to do with some of these legacy players.
Mm, sure.
All right, well, let's go to the Q&A. Alicia, what are people interested in hearing about from us?
Yeah, thanks, Josh and Karim, for that wonderful presentation. Just a reminder to please submit any questions you have using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, so that it gets in front of our speakers faster, and we will try our best to answer them all. All right, we have a couple of questions coming in already, so I'll start with the first one. How do you understand dealing with all of your vendors and your contracts on a composable solution as opposed to an all-in-one?
Ooh, good one. Josh, may I?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Great question. And I was just talking about IBM and Red Hat. And for those of you who don't know the story, look it up. It's great. But the idea here is the assumption has always been that if you're working on something that's open source, like WordPress or Drupal, you have to first go to your agency, then you have to go to your platform, and you have to figure out who's got the ball and that kind of thing. As we've made these systems more of a unified modular system, we have actually gotten down the support model down pack. So when it comes to support, it's now a seamless thread, especially if you're working with an agency that has a good partnership with a platform. like Pantheon. That way that they are in sync and the customer is not ever wondering, who do I call? It's just one support network. And for contracts, procurement also would always come to us and say, well, I don't want to have to deal with all these separate contracts. Well, that's what used to happen. As this MarTech became 5, 10, now 11,000 and growing, right? These different business units are saying, I must have this piece. So they're much more comfortable in having multi-discipline contracts and saying, here's a group of contracts for your composable system is becoming much more accepted. And if you're working with the right digital strategy agency, or you're working with the right folks who understand what your business needs are, they can help procurement walk through that and make vendors more compatible with each other.
Thanks, Karim. All right, another question here. Don't proprietary MarTech SaaS tools have all the same downsides as you talked about DXPs, for example, vendor lock-ins, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, fair point, right? Like it's you could argue correctly that the a lot of the things we talked about with downsides of DXPs are just downsides with a proprietary model in the first place. However, I think it's a really big difference in terms of where they're fitting into your stack, right? It's a big difference between I've got a monolithic thing trying to get it all from one vendor, and the core of what I'm doing is a black box, versus I have an open core that's a hub, it's under my control, and I'm able to pick and choose which other components I want to integrate with based on their merits. So you're not having the lock in there. And the other thing is, the reality is that a lot of these MarTech SaaS tools, like, they're getting up and running quickly and getting their SaaS value. There's value in that it already just works a certain way and you want to adopt that. There are certain things in your business that you want to kind of be commodified. You don't want to invent your own CRM system. You probably don't want to invent your own method for doing, marketing automation. That's stuff that, like, there's best practices in industry and you should just follow them. What you're presenting to your customers or your prospects, you definitely don't want to be commodified, because if you look the same as everyone else, you've basically just ceded the entire competitive advantage. And so it's a question of where it makes sense to invest in that real deep ownership versus where does it make sense to say, you know what, I think they've got this figured out. I just want to plug into their API.
Great, thanks, Josh. Another question here. How do composable DXPs fit into the match MACH architecture?
The Mock
Mock.
Alliance. I'm a fan of them. But it's interesting. They have this actually kind of dovetails off the last question. I think the Mock Alliance is this group, for those of you who don't know, it's an industry consortium of vendors and platforms that are very much interested in pushing forward microservices, APIs, composability, and I can't remember what the H stands for. That's embarrassing, but we'll get back to you on that. But basically, it's all these folks that are essentially doing, more modern. Headless. Yes, that's the last one. So, right, it's the idea of, wanting to have all these composable pieces be, from these different vendors be integrated, and they have a kind of a fraught relationship historically with open source, because when they first got started, open source kind of had that more, and I mean, whether or not it was like an ideological purist value, it was very much the, like, we're going to run everything ourselves because that's what we do. And Mock was really trying to shake up that status quo and say, hey, you can't possibly move fast enough if you're trying to own it all yourself. And, like, open source means you're running servers and you're managing security updates and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that just bogs down an organization, which is true. And because they're an industry consortium, they're intentionally trying to position their members as part of, like, the next generation of things, and trying to kind of keep other more legacy vendors out of their ecosystem. I think their perspective is evolving there, as the pragmatic reality of, you're not going to do everything it's not going to be all microservices, everything for every piece of your stack, right? There's going to be some more conventional components that you're going to want to have be well integrated in there. Plus the notion that like open source doesn't necessarily mean owning it all, do it yourself, top to bottom. Open source could mean leveraging innovation where it matters. But today there's, it's a, it's complex. Let's just leave it at that.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think the future is for the Mock Alliance not being static on where they began, but trying to understand how open source fits in, because it's such a fallacy that it's SaaS versus open source. It's not. They work very well together. All the things, but in moderation.
Great. Thank you, Karim and Josh. And then I
I
saw we
see
had,
there's another question in the chat from Kevin.
yeah, I'll bring that one up. So Kevin loves the idea of an open core, but how do the small number of open advocates within an organization compete with a juggernaut of marketing and sales creating content? And then I think you put a link to Salesforce product experience cloud features.
So I'd have to familiarize myself a little more with that particular member of the Salesforce family. But if you're looking to like make the argument internally, I would once again go to salesforce.com and view source because they're using WordPress for their homepage.
Yep. So use the right tool for the right function, right?
Yeah.
So even my answer is even if Salesforce is using WordPress as their core CMS, then what are you using best of tool for best of use, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. The other thing is, within the overall sort of Salesforce Marketing Cloud, there's a whole bunch of different tools in there, and like that it's just the trajectory of the industry, like the Adobes and the Sitecores of the world of just that it is a model of let's just sell our whole thing to people, and again, there's not no value in that, but the reality of what I've seen in market is that people are using some elements of that Salesforce suite that are particularly good and that they're going to have access to because they've gone in on the CRM. Like the core CRM is very good, and some of the other components that they can bundle along with it are also quite nice, but often they're not using the tools that they provide to deliver actually existing web experiences because those are not quite as good.
You want to prove our point? I just took the URL that was given us in chat and put it through what CMS, and that URL is using Adobe. So even within Salesforce, right, you have some business units that are using a monolith, and then you have their .com that's literally using WordPress because my supposition, it's faster and easier to deal with.
Yeah, and again, they're not just like using vanilla WordPress by itself. I'm sure it's like there's like 20 other technologies in kind of similar to the case studies that you've cited, Kareem, that have been integrated as part of that whole project. So it's not to, I don't want to, belittle anything. You have to do this right, but I think you can, and this is why we're trying to, put thought leadership like this out there as well. It's just to give people, a different perspective and maybe more ammunition to resist that siren song of it'll be really easy if we just use one vendor for everything. Because that's appealing. Let's admit that that's appealing, but it's so commonly not the case.
It's so commonly not the case. And both of our organizations have customers who are multinationals that decide they literally won't have more than a certain percentage on one CMS. And they make that decision for the old school IT, it has to be bomb-proof conversation. Yet the more composable we get, the more that means that you can make modular changes without the need of going through a 6 to 12-month migration if you decide to move off of one piece of it. So it sort of fits as where we need to explore for the future. Again,
Yeah.
my supposition.
And actually, Alicia, I'm going to advance us in the interest of time because we're
Yeah.
about here. because the final slide, we are also working, in addition to doing this live webinar, which thank you again for all of your time, and it'll be recorded and people can make it available on demand. We're working on an ebook that explores a lot of these same concepts that we've been talking about, and kind of makes it a little bit more official, substantive, white papery kind of approach. So for again, trying to build the case for this approach within your organization, stay tuned. We'll have an asset that you can use. Ebooks, webinars aren't everyone's cup of tea. Ebooks aren't everyone's cup of tea. But with more and more materials available, hopefully we can help make a more and more compelling case so that people sort of take this path, because we really do believe that it's going to lead to better outcomes for all of you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have for questions, and thank you for closing it out, Josh. Thank you for joining us today, everyone in the audience, and thank you so much to our speakers, Josh and Karim, for providing such great insight. As mentioned in the beginning, the event was being recorded, and we'll share a copy with everyone registered by next week. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us, and we can direct you to one of our team members who can best support you. All right. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Alicia. Thanks, Karim.
Thank you. Bye-bye.